Chapter 1: The artist's vision in the bustling city of Vesper. Tucked away on a narrow, shadow-filled street, stood an old, unassuming building that most would pass without a second glance. But within these walls, an artist named Simon had found his sanctuary. Simon was not just any artist. His creations were lifelike animations that were both revered and feared for their unsettling realism. His studio was his realm, filled with sketches and figures, each animated character more disturbing than the last, each carrying a story of its own. One foggy evening, Simon received a mysterious package with no return address. Inside was a peculiar, ancient-looking book titled Arcane Shadows of the Animated. It was bound in what appeared to be leather but felt colder, almost alive, to the touch. As Simon leafed through the yellowed pages, he found it filled with strange symbols and sketches that seemed to move subtly, as if alive, when viewed from the corners of his eyes. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, Simon began to use the book as inspiration for a new animation project. He started with a character named Alara, a ghostly figure who wandered through haunted woods. As Simon sketched, he felt an eerie sense of being watched, but whenever he turned around, there was nothing but the quiet shadows of his studio. Chapter 2: Alara's Woods. As the days passed, Simon worked tirelessly on the animation, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain. The world he created for Alara was dark and twisted, filled with gnarled trees and mist. The deeper into the animation Simon went, the more he felt that Alara was not just a figment of his imagination. She seemed to whisper to him, her voice a faint murmur that echoed in the early hours of the morning. One night, while working alone in his studio, the line between Simon's reality and the animated world he created began to blur. The flickering shadows cast by his desk lamp seemed to stretch and twist into the gnarled trees of Alara's woods. A cold wind brushed against his neck, and he heard the soft whisper of Alara's voice, "Help me." Startled, Simon spun around, his heart racing, but again, there was nothing. Shaken, he decided it was time to take a break. He locked up his studio and went for a walk, hoping the cool night air would clear his head. But the further Simon walked, the more he realized that the streets of Vesper no longer looked familiar. The fog had thickened, and the buildings around him looked decayed and abandoned. The streetlights flickered as if struggling to remain lit. It was then that Simon understood he was no longer in Vesper. He had somehow walked into the very world he had animated, into Alara's woods. Panic set in as he tried to make sense of what was happening. The book? It must have been the book. It had somehow brought Alara's world to life, or worse, drawn him into it. He turned back the way he came, trying to retrace his steps, but the path seemed to continually shift, disorienting him further. As he stumbled through the fog, the whispering grew louder, now joined by other voices, murmurs, and cries that seemed to come from the very air itself. Shadows moved just beyond his sight, fleeting and quick. Simon's heart pounded as he realized he was not alone in these woods. Suddenly, ahead in the mist, a figure appeared. It was Alara, just as he had drawn her, but alive and radiant with an eerie light. Her eyes were deep pools of sorrow, and her hands reached out to him. "Simon," she called softly, her voice resonant with an otherworldly timbre. "You created this world, and now you are part of it. Help us find peace. Free us." Her words echoed in Simon's mind as he stood frozen, the realization of what he needed to do slowly dawning on him. He had to finish the story, to give it an ending. Only then could the spirit's track within the animation find rest, and perhaps he could find his way back home. Determined, Simon followed Alara deeper into the woods. The path was treacherous, the whispers grew more urgent, and the shadows clung to his steps like tattered cloaks. Each step took him further into the heart of the animated world he had unwittingly brought to life, each sketch now a haunting reality he had to navigate. As they reached a clearing bathed in moonlight, Alara stopped. Here, the air was heavy, charged with a palpable sense of finality. This was where the story would end, where Simon had to confront the creation of his own making. But as he prepared to draw the final scenes, to give closure to the haunted woods and its wandering spirits, a chill swept through the clearing, and the ground beneath Simon's feet began to tremble. Shadows stretched and twisted around him, forming into figures that whispered of unfinished tales and broken fates. Alara's figure shimmered with a ghostly light, her expression sorrowful as she watched Simon struggle to control the chaos he had unleashed. Every character must have their resolve. Simon, Alara's voice echoed around him, her words blending with the rustle of the leaves. Their endings, be they tragic or peaceful, give them release. Simon nodded, understanding what he needed to do, but as he reached for his sketchpad to finalize the animations, his hand trembled. How could he conclude a story that had taken on a life of its own? Each character he had drawn, now vivid and alive before him, seemed to plead for their own version of peace. Armed with his pencils and inks, Simon began to work under the watchful eyes of the animated spirits surrounding him. The air was thick with anticipation as the pencil moved swiftly across the paper. He sketched scenes of resolution and redemption, his lines guided by an unseen force, as if the characters themselves were dictating their final moments. The ground stilled, and the air grew warmer as each character found their peace. The twisted trees slowly untangled their branches, and the dense fog began to lift, revealing the starry sky above. Simon worked tirelessly, his focus absolute as he breathed life into the last of the sketches. As he drew the final lines, a profound silence fell over the clearing. The animated figures, one by one, turned to mist and faded away, their whispers of gratitude lingering in the air. Alara approached Simon, her appearance now less ghostly, more serene. "You have freed them, Simon," she said, her voice no longer echoing but clear and sweet. "And now it is time for you to return." "But what about you, Alara?" Simon asked, a pang of sadness in his heart as he faced her. "Will you leave as well?" Alara smiled, a wistful, beautiful expression that seemed to light up the clearing. "I was never trapped like the others. I was here to guide you, to help you see the power of your own creations." With those words, Alara stepped back, her form beginning to fade into the light of the clearing. "Remember, Simon, create with heart, for your creations have more power than you know." As she disappeared completely, Simon felt a gentle breeze pass through the clearing, carrying away the last remnants of the night's eerie tension. He stood alone, the weight of the sketchpad in his hand, filled with the stories he had concluded. The world around him began to shift, the animated landscape dissolving into the early morning mist of the real world. Simon found himself standing on the familiar streets of Vesper, the Starlight Hotel just visible in the dawn light. He was back, truly back, but he knew something within him had changed forever. Simon's walk back to his studio was reflective, his mind replaying the events that had unfolded. By the time he reached his sanctuary, the city was waking up, the first hints of daily bustle beginning to fill the air. He opened the door to his studio, the familiar scent of paint and paper welcoming him. Sitting at his desk, Simon opened the sketchpad, his eyes tracing over the completed drawings. Each line, each character, held a new significance now, a reminder of the journey he had taken and the lessons learned. In the days that followed, Simon's art took on a new depth, his animations filled with the emotional resonance of his experience. Audiences around the world were captivated by the depth and realism of his work, unaware of the true adventure that had inspired it. But in the quiet moments of creation, Simon would often pause and glance at the corner of his studio, half expecting to see Alara's ghostly figure watching over him, a silent guardian of his artistic soul. The events at the Starlight Hotel had become a part of him, a hauntingly beautiful chapter in his life story that would continue to inspire and shape his art in ways he could never have imagined. As the months passed and Simon's notoriety grew, the memory of that night at the Starlight Hotel melded into his daily life like a distant dream. Yet, some evenings, as shadows stretched long and the dusk settled into his studio, the edges of his reality seemed to blur, whispering to him that the world he had visited was not as far removed as he might wish. Chapter 3, The Unfolding. One such evening, as winter's grip loosened over Vesper and the promise of spring whispered through budding trees, Simon received an invitation that reignited the ember of unease he had long tried to smother. It was a handwritten note, elegant yet anonymous, requesting his presence at an art exhibition themed around the supernatural and the uncanny. The venue, none other than the Starlight Hotel, now renovated and rebranded as the Eldridge. The invitation was like a call to return to the scene of a past life, and despite his reservations, Simon felt a compelling pull to see the hotel in its new guise. The night of the event, he stood before the grand entrance of the Eldridge, its facade beautifully restored, lights casting warm glows against the twilight. Yet, beneath the surface of its new elegance, Simon sensed the echo of old whispers, felt the touch of an invisible gaze that knew him too well. Stepping inside, Simon was greeted by an opulent interior, the walls adorned with art that danced eerily on the edge of reality. Paintings and sculptures filled the space, each piece more disturbing and magnetically captivating than the last. But it was the main feature of the show, a collection called Whispers from Beyond, that drew him with an almost sentient urgency. As he approached the collection, Simon's heart began to race. The pieces were animations, but unlike any he had seen before. They moved with a fluid, lifelike quality, their subjects shifting and changing, scenes playing out with a depth that suggested they were windows to other worlds. And there, among them, was an animation that made Simon's breath catch, a hauntingly familiar scene of a ghostly figure wandering through a dark, mist-filled forest. It was Alara, exactly as he had created her, but she was not alone. In the animation, Alara was followed by a dark figure, a shadow that moved with an unsettling, predatory grace. It was the Watcher, Simon realized, his creation brought to life in another artist's vision. The realization struck him with both awe and terror. Someone else had seen into the same dark world he had and had brought back their own story. Compelled to learn more, Simon sought out the curator of the exhibition, a tall, thin man with an intense gaze named Elias. When questioned about the source of the animations in Whispers from Beyond, Elias smiled, a knowing, secretive curl of the lips. They were submitted anonymously, Elias explained, his voice smooth, almost hypnotic. But I must say, Mr. Clay, your own work inspired these pieces. It seems you are not the only one touched by the shadows of other realms. The conversation left Simon unnerved. As he mingled through the crowd, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, more insistent. It wasn't just the animations that seemed alive, the entire hotel pulsed with a subtle, otherworldly energy. Simon could feel the thin veil between his world and the one he had visited at the Starlight Hotel wavering, threads of darkness weaving through the edges of his perception. The night wore on, and Simon found himself standing before Lara's animation once more. This time, however, he noticed something different, a small, nearly imperceptible detail. In the background, behind Alara and the Watcher, was a figure that bore a striking resemblance to himself. It was a mere shadow, but unmistakably Simon, his features etched in the animated world. Chilled to the core, Simon realized that his connection to that other world was not as severed as he had believed. It was calling him back, pulling him into its depths through the medium of his own art and the creations of others who had glimpsed its horrors. As the evening came to a close, Simon left the Eldridge with a heavy heart and a troubled mind. The invitation had not been a mere call to revisit an old haunt, but a summons to confront a reality he could no longer deny. The animated worlds he created were more than figments of imagination. They were glimpses into a parallel existence, a realm where stories were far too real, and the creators were far from mere observers. Driving home under the starlit sky, Simon knew he had to return to the roots of his ordeal, to the original sketches and animations that had started it all. He needed to understand how deep the connection went and what it truly meant to animate the shadows. His journey was far from over. In fact, a new chapter was just beginning, one that would delve deeper into the realm of shadows than he ever imagined. As Simon drove through the winding streets of Vesper, his thoughts were a tumult of apprehension and intrigue. The visage of his own likeness in the animation haunted him, its implications gnawing at his sanity. Was it merely artistic inspiration drawn from some collective unconscious, or had his interactions with the other realms somehow imprinted him into its very fabric? Upon reaching his studio, Simon didn't bother with the lights. Instead, he went straight to his work area, where stacks of sketches and half-finished projects lay scattered. His hand hesitated over the drawings, a palpable sense of dread filling the air. Finally, he picked up a sketch pad, the one where he first conceptualized Alara and her dark, ensorcelled forest. Flipping through the pages, Simon found the initial drawings innocuous enough, but as he progressed, the lines seemed to tremble and shift under his gaze, as if alive. Shadows in the corners of his studio danced like specters in the periphery of his vision, retreating when he tried to focus directly on them. A cold sweat broke out on his brow as he continued to turn the pages. There, towards the back of the sketch pad, was an unfinished drawing, an image he didn't recall creating. It depicted a gateway, ornate and foreboding, standing amidst the twisted trees of Alara's woods. Something about the gateway felt ominously familiar, and as Simon stared, the air around him grew thick with the scent of moss and decay, the very essence of the animated forest he had crafted. Compelled by a force he couldn't resist, Simon began to draw. His hand moved with a feverish intensity, adding details to the gateway, its arches twisted like the limbs of the trees surrounding it. The world around him seemed to dim, the only sounds the scratch of his pencil and his ragged breathing. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, it was impossible to tell. Time seemed distorted, bending around him like the surreal landscapes he drew. As he laid the pencil down, exhausted and spent, he realized the gateway was complete. It was then that the whispers returned, more distinct than ever, murmuring secrets in a language that tugged at the edges of his understanding. "You must come," they said, a chorus of voices that were both enticing and terrifying. "You must see." The words echoed in his mind, a siren call that promised answers and threatened madness. Simon knew what he had to do. He had to go back to the Starlight Hotel, now the Eldry, and confront whatever awaited him there. Perhaps within its renovated walls, within the heart of his own creations, lay the key to unraveling the mysteries that bound him to this dark, animated world. Gathering his sketchpad and a few necessary items, Simon locked his studio behind him. The city seemed asleep as he drove through the empty streets, the moon a silent witness to his solitary journey. Arriving at the Eldridge, the hotel appeared different by night, more imposing, its windows like dark, watchful eyes. The lobby was deserted at this late hour, the normal bustle of guests replaced by a suffocating silence. Simon's footsteps echoed off the marble floors as he made his way to the main exhibition hall, where he had seen the animated depiction of his and Alara's realms. The paintings and sculptures stood shrouded in darkness, their forms less defined but somehow more menacing. Simon's flashlight beam played over the artworks, each shadow seeming to recoil from the light. He approached the animation of Alara's woods, the figures frozen on the display screen. Taking a deep breath, Simon opened his sketchpad to the drawing of the gateway. As he did, a wind rose within the hall, the air swirling around him, carrying whispers and cries. The animation flickered to life, the figures moving once more, Alara and the watcher stepping aside as the gateway he had drawn emerged on the screen. Simon stepped closer, his heart pounding. The gateway on the screen mirrored his drawing perfectly, but it was what lay beyond the gateway that drew him in, a realm of shadows and whispers, of secrets waiting to be discovered. He reached out, his hand trembling, as the boundary between his world and the animated realm thinned, the gateway beckoning. With a final glance back at the silent hall, Simon stepped through, disappearing from the world he knew into the depths of his own creation, following the whispers that had called him from the very beginning. As the screen flickered once more, then went dark, the hall was silent once again. But in the shadows, the faintest trace of whispers could be heard, recounting the tale of the artist who animated his nightmares and walked into them, blurring the lines between creation and creator, between reality and the animated shadows he had summoned. In the realm beyond the gateway, Simon found himself immersed in a world that was at once both alien and hauntingly familiar. The forest around him was thick with a perpetual mist, the trees like gnarled sentinels watching his every move. The ground beneath his feet was soft, the decayed leaves muffling his steps as he ventured deeper into the forest. The whispers grew louder, now clear voices calling his name, guiding him onward. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of moss and earth. As he walked, the forest seemed to breathe with him, each step bringing him closer to an unknown destiny. After what felt like hours, Simon arrived at a clearing where the moonlight broke through the canopy, illuminating a scene that took his breath away. In the center of the clearing stood a colossal tree, its trunk wide and twisted, roots sprawling across the forest floor like a network of veins. Hanging from the branches were hundreds of drawings, each fluttering gently in the breeze, a tapestry of animated sketches that told the stories of the forest and its spirits. Drawn to the tree, Simon approached cautiously. The drawings depicted scenes of joy and sorrow, life and death, each animated with a life of its own. But it was the base of the tree that held his attention. Carved into the wood was a door, small and almost hidden by the roots. As he examined the door, the voices whispered insistently, urging him to open it. With a trembling hand, Simon reached out and pushed the door open. Beyond it lay a small chamber, the walls lined with more drawings, each pulsating with a soft, ethereal light. In the center of the chamber was a pedestal, and on it, the ancient book that had started it all. Simon stepped closer, his heart pounding as he realized that this was the heart of his creations, the source of the connection between his world and the animated realm. He opened the book, and the chamber filled with a blinding light. The voices crescendoed into a harmonious chorus, singing of bindings released and spirits freed. The drawings on the walls began to move, spiraling towards the book, their lines and colors merging with the pages until the book glowed with a radiant energy. Simon felt a surge of power flow through him, a connection forming between him and the book, sealing the bond that had been forged by his art. He understood now that he was not just a creator, but a keeper, a guardian of the stories and spirits that lived within these pages. His role was not to dominate, but to harmonize, to maintain the balance between his world and the animated realm. As the last drawing merged with the book, the light began to fade, and the chamber grew quiet. The door behind him opened, leading back to the forest, now peaceful and still under the moonlit sky. Simon emerged from the tree, the book securely under his arm, a sense of peace settling in his soul. He knew he would return to his world, but he would always be a part of this one, forever linked by the stories he had animated and the spirits he had set free. Walking back through the gateway, Simon found himself in the exhibition hall of the Eldritch once more. The animations were still, the figures paused as if waiting for his return. He placed the book gently on the pedestal where he had found it in his studio, its pages now filled with new stories, new life. As the sun rose, casting its first light through the windows of the Eldritch, Simon left the hotel, the echoes of the animated realm whispering farewell. He returned to his life in Vesper, his art forever changed, enriched by the knowledge and experiences of his journey. Years passed, and Simon continued to create, his animations celebrated around the world for their depth and beauty. But he kept the true story of the Starlight Hotel, now the Eldritch, and the animated realm a secret, a personal chapter of his life that he revisited only in the quiet moments of creation. And sometimes, late at night in his studio, when the world was silent and the shadows danced lightly on the walls, Simon would hear the whispers of Alara and the Watcher, reminding him of the thin veil between reality and animation, between creator and creation. In those moments, he knew that true stories, like true art, live forever, suspended in the delicate balance between light and shadow, waiting to be rediscovered, reanimated, and retold. As Simon grew older, the world of animation that he had pioneered took on new dimensions under the hands of younger artists inspired by his work. But none knew of the sacred trust he had with the realm beyond the gateway, a trust sealed by the mysterious book and the pact he had formed within the otherworldly forest. Decades passed, and Simon became a revered figure in the art world, his studio a place of pilgrimage for those who sought to learn from the master of animated arts. However, as the end of his days approached, Simon felt a deep responsibility to ensure that the knowledge and powers of the book were not lost or, worse, misused after he was gone. On a stormy autumn night, with the wind howling like a chorus of spirits from his animations, Simon decided it was time to return to the Eldritch one last time. His old bones ached as he packed the ancient book carefully into a leather satchel, its surface warm but still pulsing with a faint light, a heartbeat of the otherworldly energy it contained. Arriving at the hotel, which had since been turned into a museum showcasing the history of animated film, including a section dedicated to his own works, Simon felt a surreal sense of coming full circle. The building was empty, closed for the evening, but the curator, a young woman named Elise who admired Simon greatly, had agreed to meet him there. "Simon, I can't tell you what an honor it is to help you with whatever it is you're planning," Elise said, her voice filled with a mixture of reverence and curiosity as she unlocked the door to the exhibition hall where the gateway painting now hung, preserved behind glass. "Thank you, Elise. What I am about to do must be done with great care," Simon said, his voice grave. "This book," he patted the satchel gently, "contains more than just drawings. It holds a covenant with another world, one that I must ensure is kept safe." Elise listened, her eyes wide as Simon explained the true nature of the book and his role as its keeper. As he spoke, the air around them grew denser, the shadows in the corners of the room deepening as if listening. "Tonight, I must secure the gateway once more," Simon continued, his old hands trembling slightly as he removed the book from the satchel. "And I need your help, Elise." Together, they approached the painting, the scene of the animated forest as eerie and alive as ever. Simon opened the book to a page marked with a ribbon, the symbols and drawings vibrating with energy. He began to chant softly, the words not spoken in decades, each syllable echoing in the vast hall. As he chanted, the air around them shimmered, the boundary between the worlds thinning. The figures in the painting moved, the trees swaying, Alara and the Watcher appearing at the edges of the forest, watching them with solemn, knowing eyes. With a final word, Simon closed the book, and a gust of wind swept through the hall, the pages fluttering briefly before settling. The painting glowed, then returned to its normal state, the gateway sealed once again. "It is done," Simon said, his voice weary but content. "The bond is renewed, and the gateway is secure." Elise, overwhelmed by what she had witnessed, nodded silently. She knew that this night would change her life forever, that she now carried a part of this incredible legacy. Simon handed her the book, his eyes serious. "Guard this well, Elise. Keep it safe, and keep it secret. You are the keeper now." Elise took the book, her hands trembling under its weight. "I will guard it with my life, Simon. Thank you for trusting me with this." As the storm outside subsided, Simon looked around the hall one last time, his heart at peace. He had passed on his knowledge and secured the bond between the worlds, just as he had promised many years ago. Leaving the Eldritch, Simon walked out into the calm night, the air fresh with the scent of rain. He felt lighter, freed from the burden he had carried for so long. Behind him, the museum stood silent, a bastion of stories and secrets, its most important now in the capable hands of its new guardian. And though Simon Clay would pass on not long after that night, his legacy would live on, not just through his films but through the quiet guardianship of the gateway, ensuring that the worlds within his animations remained a source of wonder, safely bridged by the keepers of his secrets.